One rainy night, he gave away his only raincoat to a homeless woman, and thought he'd never see her again. Years later, when he was the one shivering and broken, she was the one who saved him. It was one of those nights in New York when the rain came down in sheets, soaking everything in its path. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement, making the streets glow in streaks of orange and blue. Daniel, a 27-year-old marketing executive, was hurrying home after a long day at the office. He had just finished a big presentation and felt exhausted, his only wish being to reach the warmth of his apartment. As he adjusted the hood of his raincoat tighter against the downpour, he noticed someone sitting by the entrance of an old bakery that had closed hours ago. The figure was huddled under a thin blanket, shivering violently. It was a woman, her hair damp and clinging to her face, her shoes worn out with holes, her hands clutching a paper bag as though it contained her entire life. Daniel slowed his steps and, against the voice in his head telling him to just keep walking, he stopped. Something in her trembling form caught his heart. He bent slightly and asked, "Ma'am, are you okay?" The woman lifted her head, and though her face was pale and her lips blue from the cold, her eyes still held a quiet dignity. "I'm fine," she whispered, though clearly she was not. Rainwater was soaking her blanket, and she had no umbrella, no protection, nothing. Daniel hesitated. His apartment was only 2 blocks away, he could have gone home, had a hot shower, and let this woman fade into the background of the thousands of unseen people who lived on the margins of the city. But something inside him tugged harder than logic. He unzipped his raincoat and draped it over her shoulders. "Here, you need this more than I do," he said softly. The woman's eyes widened as if she couldn't believe someone would part with something so essential on a night like this. I can't take this," she stammered, clutching at the coat as though afraid it might vanish. "Please," Daniel insisted. "I'll be fine. Just stay warm." For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the hammering rain. Then, with tears forming in her tired eyes, she whispered, "Thank you, you don't know what this means." Daniel nodded and walked away, shivering now without his coat, but strangely lighter in spirit. That night he went home, dripping wet, yet something about that brief encounter lingered with him. He hadn't given her money, hadn't solved her problems, but he had given her dignity, and that mattered. He didn't know her name, didn't ask about her story, and in the chaos of life, the memory began to blur like many fleeting moments do. But fate, as it often does, had marked this act in invisible ink, waiting for the right time to reappear. Years passed. Daniel's career soared as he climbed the ladder at his firm. He became known as someone who worked tirelessly, someone who always went the extra mile. But with success came stress, and with stress came mistakes. By the time he was 35, Daniel had faced a major downfall. A client deal went wrong, not entirely his fault, but in the corporate world, blame often found a convenient target. His reputation took a hit, his finances dwindled, and eventually he lost his job. Suddenly, the man who once had everything found himself struggling to pay rent, living on savings that disappeared faster than he thought possible. Depression weighed heavily on him, and he withdrew from friends and colleagues, ashamed of his failure. One rainy evening, nearly 8 years after that night with the homeless woman, Daniel found himself walking down a street he didn't usually take. He stopped outside a small community shelter, the kind that provided meals and warm beds to those who had nowhere else to go. Driven by hunger more than pride, he walked in. Inside, the smell of soup and bread filled the air, and volunteers moved about, serving food and offering warm smiles. Daniel stood in line, feeling awkward, out of place among people who had endured far worse. Yet life had brought him here, stripped of titles and suits. As he reached the serving table, he froze. Behind the counter was a woman in her 40s, her hair neatly tied back, her clothes clean, her demeanor confident yet kind. There was something about her eyes that struck a chord deep within him. She looked at him for a long moment, then gasped softly. "You," she said, her voice trembling. I know you. Daniel frowned, confused, until memory came crashing back: the rain, the bakery, the raincoat. His heart pounded. It's you, he whispered. She smiled, and in her eyes shone both recognition and gratitude. You don't know what you did for me that night, she said, handing him a steaming bowl of soup. That raincoat, it wasn't just about keeping warm. It reminded me that I mattered, that I wasn't invisible. That one gesture gave me hope at a time when I had none. Daniel stared, speechless, as she continued. That night, I promised myself that if I ever got the chance, I'd turn my life around. And I did. With the help of this shelter, I got back on my feet, found a job, studied at night, and now, her voice broke slightly, now I run this place. Daniel's throat tightened. The woman he had once given his raincoat to was now giving him warmth, food, and dignity in return. Life had come full circle in a way he never could have imagined. That night, Daniel ate quietly, humbled beyond words, as the rain poured outside just like it had all those years ago. Over the following weeks, Daniel became a regular at the shelter, not just for the food, but for the sense of community he hadn't felt in a long time. The woman, whose name he learned was Grace, spoke to him often, checking in not just on his needs but on his spirit. Grace shared her story in fragments: how she had once been a teacher but had lost her job after a family tragedy, how grief and debt had swallowed her until she found herself on the streets. The night Daniel gave her his raincoat, she had been at her lowest, on the verge of giving up completely. I thought no one would ever see me as human again, she confessed one evening. But you did. That's why I fight every day to keep this shelter running, because people need to be seen. Her words planted something in Daniel's heart. Slowly, with encouragement from Grace, he started helping at the shelter too. At first, it was small tasks, setting tables, cleaning dishes, but soon he was organizing donation drives, using his marketing skills to bring attention and funding to the shelter. For the first time in years, he felt useful again. Grace noticed the light returning to his eyes, the confidence slowly rebuilding. She often reminded him, "You gave me hope once. Let me give it back to you now." Daniel began to realize that success wasn't about titles or corporate achievements, it was about impact, about what you left behind in people's lives. The more he worked alongside Grace, the more he saw how a single act of kindness could ripple outward in ways unimaginable. What had once been a fleeting decision to give away a raincoat had turned into a chain of transformation, first for Grace, and now for him. By spring, Daniel had regained his balance. With Grace's help, he applied for consulting jobs, and soon opportunities opened up again. But even as his professional life revived, he never left the shelter. It had become his second home, and Grace had become more than just a friend. She was living proof that kindness could turn despair into destiny. 2 years later, the shelter had grown into one of the most respected in the city, largely because of the partnership between Grace and Daniel. They worked side by side, creating programs not just for meals, but for education, job training, and mental health support. Formerly homeless men and women now found purpose within those walls, and every success story added fuel to their mission. One evening, after a long day of organizing a fundraiser, Daniel and Grace sat outside the shelter as rain once again pattered against the streets. It felt like a reminder of where their story began. "Funny, isn't it?" Grace said softly, gazing at the rain. "How something as small as a raincoat brought us here." Daniel smiled, his eyes distant with reflection. "It wasn't the raincoat," he replied. "It was the choice. The choice to care." Grace looked at him, her eyes moist. "You may never know how many lives you saved that night by saving mine." Daniel shook his head gently. "And you may never know how much you saved me in return." They sat in silence, the rain carrying memories between them, unspoken yet deeply understood. The city bustled around them, unaware of the quiet miracle that had unfolded. For Daniel, the lesson was etched forever: what you give, you get back, sometimes in ways you could never imagine. A raincoat had started it all, but love, kindness, and resilience had carried it forward. As the shelter lights glowed warmly in the distance, Daniel felt certain of one thing: sometimes the smallest gestures can rewrite the story of a life, and sometimes, they can save two lives at once. This story is proof that one small act of kindness can change lives forever. If this touched your heart, share it with someone who believes in humanity. Don't forget to subscribe to Kindness Vibes for more real, emotional stories that remind us why compassion matters.